everybody, and welcome back to another episode of RoboReplay. In this one, we'll be taking a look at the three-match series that happened on the Milstein Division Finals, and seeing what happened to what everyone thought would be one of the best alliances going into Einstein's, but they managed to get upset by the Alliance 2 here. So let's see how 254 and Bread didn't end up going to Einstein's, and 118 and Petty ended up stealing it right under them. And let's check it out. So, getting into it, first thing in auto, we're going to notice is that I want to just point out 254's auto because I really love how they do it. If we just let it play out, what you'll eventually end up seeing is that 254 is going to go for 5 game pieces, but they're going to do it in a way that makes it open for their partners to score from the backside as well. So what we see here is 254 does this piece, then they go for 1, 2, 3, 4. And because of the fact that they're able to slam these coral on and remove this algae as well without de-scoring the L3 corals, it leaves the backside open for Bread to do their pieces. And it also means that if they did happen to have a robot on their field that did the lollipops in the back, they could have space for another robot to do a 4-piece on this side, a 5-piece here, and then you do a 4-piece here. It could be a ridiculous amount of coral points, which I assume we will be seeing at events like Chessy Champs or something in the off season, where I wouldn't be surprised if people ended up with like 13, 14 coral autos. But just for this match, what they decide to do is just say, okay, we're going to do the classic standard thing that we saw lots of teams running earlier in the season. 1153, I think, was the first team that I saw really do it, where you have people just take algae off the reef, put an L4 up, and just try to put algae in the net. And that's your center bot. And then your third robot is doing basically what Orbit does, try to stack as many L4s as possible. On the other side, it's the same idea, except 324 has a very interesting auto, right? Instead of putting the algae into the barge, instead they try to pick up the algae and put it in the processor in their auto, which I think is a really interesting idea. Just out of virtue of, maybe they won't notice it. Maybe if they don't see us ever score in teleop for a processor, they'll never see us scoring it in auto, so it'll just be left there, and then we get a free 6 points. So that's probably the idea behind it, I would assume. So just getting into Telly, we're going to see that these alliances have the same understanding of the game that we saw on Einstein, right? Everybody needs to get rid of the algae first. If you don't get rid of the algae, it might get stolen, and that 8-point swing is really bad for your alliance because, 8 points in this game is 4 cycles. And if you weren't here for the last video, the way the 8 point is coming where the 8 points is coming from is basically just if you have one algae getting stolen, then your max goes down by 4 points because you can't score that in the barge, and their max goes up by 4 points because they took it and scored it from you. Right, so that's where the 8-point swing is coming from. It's just maximum amount of points that your alliance can score. And so starting off here, we see that 324 is immediately sent over to go play some defense. Their entire job that they're basically just going to have their team do is just say, you are going to sit in this corner, and you are going to deny as many ground intake pieces as possible from coming out. And it's a pretty good strategy, because I'm assuming what Alliance 2 is thinking is, okay, we don't know if we can outscore them in Telly, and we don't really think we can win this, so we'll throw our defense robot on the other side, because we think that they're going to play triple offense, and maybe our defense robot can get a bunch of value that they wouldn't otherwise get if we just went for triple offense on our side. And so what we'll end up seeing throughout this entire thing is just 324 does a pretty solid job locking down 1477 from scoring most anything. You can see at the corner they do a pretty good job. But one of the biggest issues is the fact that 1477 happens to be the third best robot in Alliance 1, not the first or second, which is what Bread and 254 are. So it ends up being not as valuable as if they tried to defend Bread or 254 to not an amazing extent, versus they're doing a great job defending 1477. And we see, right, on this Blue Alliance side, because of the fact they have triple offense, they are having 1477 do the L1s. It's the same, not same sort of arm that Madtown is doing, but the coral once picked up is positioned in the same way, which allows you to stack it on top of each other and get those little pyramids that we see, right? Because you could have 1 coral, 2 coral, and then third coral on top of that, giving you a 3 coral pyramid, just making it a lot easier for you to score in general. Yeah, so this entire match is just going to be, it's a 2 versus 4 basically on both sides, Their Blue Alliance 1 is just like, yep, we think we can outscore with when you guys are setting a defense. We are trust in 254 and Bread to just make up the values. And that's what they do end up doing in this match. They end up doing a great job. They outscore and they win the match. And one of the biggest things that I noticed from this match in particular is the fact that Chips is doing a good job just hanging around people, but they do end up getting some penalties at the end here that do swing this match quite a bit. And it's just because of the fact that they're being a little bit overzealous in where they're positioning. Maybe at the end here we'll see them go for a little bit of a climb defend that they maybe shouldn't have. But one of the other big things I want to notice about this Alliance 1 and versus Alliance 2 is the way that this Alliance 1 was, I think, in my estimation, the way this Alliance 1 was made in terms of how Bread wanted to craft this alliance. So looking at the stats in terms of data that I found publicly, there was really only two options that Bread were going to take, right? It was 254, it was 118. And according to the averages of both of these teams, it looks like both of them are relatively similar, right? Like neither one of them is going to be like a clear pick above the other. So when you have two robots that are really close to each other, what do you want to take? What are you looking for in an alliance partner? And so my if I had to just take a guess and just try to read their minds for a sec, then maybe 254 has a really good auto, right? You love the compatibility of this 5-piece auto on one side, and then you can run your 5-piece backside. And then you could have a third robot do an algae in the middle. And then one of the other things that I think was a really big draw of 254 is the fact that, from what I've seen, 254 has some of the highest peaks in terms of the way that they score in Telly that I've seen in the world, right? Like you have Madtown, you have 2910, you have Orbit, you have High Tide, sure. But 254 and this Bread and 254 both have some incredible peaks that can match any of those teams that I just mentioned. And 118, although they're an incredible team, they weren't peaking as high as 254 was from the way that I'm seeing. So it looks to me like they picked 254 because they were building an alliance not to just win their division, but to win Einstein's and building an alliance that could take down 3023 and 2910 and finalists. And so when you're building an alliance like that, what you're looking for isn't good averages, you're looking for high peaks. And so with high peaks comes a little bit less consistency. And that's what ends up killing these guys in the next series here, because in this series, what ends up happening is Alliance 2 isn't able to score as much as they are, and they end up in terms of telly up points, right? They're up 5 coral at this point. And so they end up just being in a position where, yeah, we can just chill. Let's just keep putting it on cycle after cycle, just get in our routine. We do a great job. And then we end up in a position where, we can just hit a climb at the end. Let's do a little bit of boosted points. Something I really love here is the fact that they have left an L4 up here to score at the end to make Alliance 2 think that they can go climb early. And I would have hoped that they score it. I don't think they end up scoring it here. But, yeah. It's a very interesting idea by them of just leaving an Alliance L4 here. Doesn't end up paying off because 324 does a pretty good job stopping them from being able to just stay in this side and forcing them to go leave to go climb. But it is a really smart idea of, hey, if we leave one more boost at the end for us, maybe they go climb early thinking that they have the lead, and then we can go slam a bunch of climbs at the end and win the match. And then at the end here, all three robots try to climb, and what ends up happening is the Alliance 2 ends up losing, but this 241 to 257 is a little bit misleading, right? So one of the Alliance 2 robots didn't end up climbing because they dropped to the ground after the end of the match, but the big gap in this isn't in terms of actual scoring, right? It's a penalty in the barge, sure. But the leave points and the coral points were the exact same for both, right? With the algae not getting stolen in this match, both of these alliances were evenly matching each other. And so going into Finals 2, what I'm assuming Alliance 2 said was, okay, so with 324, basically only, right, this was essentially just 324 was shutting down most of 1477's attempts at scoring. So if we just remove both of them, we're able to match Alliance 1 on one of their better matches. So what if we decide to change it up because we don't think that we're nearly as scared of this alliance as we were going into it? We're saying, okay, maybe we can just go triple offense, and we can win this. And so going into Finals 2, that's exactly what will happen. we'll see that 118, Petty, and 324 decide to completely switch their strategy, and they're going to send 324 as just an L1 bot, and it works out great. So let's check that out in Finals 2. Alright, so here in Finals 2, there's going to be the similar auto routine. There does end up getting a penalty called here on 324. I'm not really sure what it is. If anybody does know what that would be called for, please enlighten me. I don't really understand what it got called for. But I'm sure there's something that the head ref has been watching through the entire day, being like, oh, they did the thing, I'll call it for it. So one thing I do want to point out here is that 324 ends up picking up their processor algae, right? In this match, they do end up having an auto where they pick up the processor algae and they leave it and they just drop it on the ground. And we talked about before saying like, oh, this auto might be just because, you know, if you catch a human player not looking, then they won't notice it. Maybe we get an extra 2 points out of the algae. It's just a good idea. But so we end up sliding it in, and you can see that 254's human player, I think that looks like 254's human player, has no idea that it went in because, you know, you're not really expecting a robot to do anything for processor related when the entire strategy for both alliances has been, oh, we have to do algae in the barge, otherwise we're going to lose. Which is, I think, plays into the fact of why he's not looking at it or scoring it. And then, so 324 is doing basically the same role as 1477. Both these robots are just doing L1s. They have a very, very similar style of arm. If we look at 324, right, in terms of 1477, they have the hot dog style way of picking up coral off the ground, and then 1477 is trying to do the same thing on the other side, picking a hot dog off the ground. And so it really just comes down to, you know, let's see who can score more. It's the same thing that we saw on Einstein's. If you lose an algae, which did end up happening here, I would like to point out, there was an algae that ended up rolling over here, right? There's actually 10 algae on Alliance's one side. So they could end up having that 8-point swing, except for the fact that if we look at where this algae ends up, it ends up barely under bread. And so this is, I think this algae's positioning essentially cost it in terms of why Alliance 1 will never end up scoring this algae, is because of the fact that 254 is the algae bot, right? They are the ones who is picking up the algae. They have an incredible ground intake algae. So they're just focused on the reef one. And so if we look at their driver station here, their sight line is to their robot and any other algae. And so where their FOV is basically like here to like here, right? They can see most of the field. They cannot see what is directly under bread. Unless they have cameras that is pointing at their own driver wall, which maybe they do and maybe they just weren't used, but unless they were like specifically looking at their cameras to go see that, there's no way they would have ever seen this algae because it's in their blind spot, and there's no reason for bread to ever look down here because they're too busy focused on trying to get coral off the ground, right? It's not their job to go look for pieces, and if there's pieces getting delivered to them, then there's no reason to go look at it off the ground. And so one of the things that you'll notice from this Blue Alliance, one of the reasons why they end up not being able to score as much as maybe they'd have liked to, is just the consistency in the scoring, right? You see that these guys, if you look at the score, are currently down 9 coral. And sure, they're up in algae, but in terms of points, it looks a lot worse right now. So looking at the score, I'm sure these guys are saying like, okay, we have to make back this coral deficit somehow. So let's try to burn as many seconds as we can off from our cycles. Maybe it means we miss some, but we have to make the lead back somehow because clearly Alliance 2 is putting up a bunch of points. And so because of this, I'm assuming this sentiment is coming from here because Bread does end up missing a bunch of cycles that they normally wouldn't miss if they just spent the time, like the half a second more to just confirm the cycle, which is why I'm assuming this. But points in this game really don't show you how far or ahead your alliance is, and it's really just coral cycles, which is a much better metric to look at. So if we look at it here, right, there are about 14 points down at this point. They're 6 cycles down basically, and from 6 cycles down, they're like 15. They bring the gap back, but it's about a 20-point gap at this point, right? 14, sure, but it's swinging between 14 to 20. And so looking at the point values, you'd say, okay, this game is is relatively close, right? This is a pretty close game in terms of how it's getting scored. But if you looked at where the coral is being scored, I would say that it's a lot more Alliance 2 favored. And the reason for that is the fact that all of these coral that is contributing to this big, like 7, 8 coral gap is all coming from the L1s, right? Most Alliance 1 has all of their L4 filled, most of their L3 filled, most of their L2 filled. Alliance 2 has a bunch of L2 left, and they have some more spaces that they can score, right? You hit this one in, and then they have just a lot more point value left on in terms of their reef than Alliance 1 does right now. And because of the fact that they have more points values left on the reef, then when they're gonna both these alliances are gonna end up filling up the reef, right? All the branches. So when they do end up filling up all the branches, as they keep scoring more, their coral will be worth more points than the Alliance 2 over here. And so when I was talking about the bread taking a little bit too long to do their cycles, right? Coral on the ground here, and they just miss one. And it's tragic. They never end up actually scoring this L3 because of the fact that, no one notices that there's a coral here because they're just like, okay, we have to make this lead back somehow. And to their credit, they do a great job. Right at the end here, there's 15 seconds left, and they are greeting hard for these extra pieces to try to make it close. And they pull it back really, really, really close. So 10 seconds left on the climb. They end up going up. Bread gets their climb. Everybody on both alliances gets their climb. And everybody is up. It looks like an Alliance 2 victory by one singular point. But here's the thing. There's a processor that never got scored. That algae in auto in processor that never got noticed by the human player, because who's scoring algae in the processor at this point, Everybody's putting in the barge. Why would we ever score it in the processor? You have to put it in the barge, otherwise you're just going to lose points. It doesn't get scored. And I'm going to give this human player the benefit of the doubt. I would hope that they weren't just looking at the robots just being like la-di-da. I would hope that they were doing some signals of some sort or some other job that made them not look at the processor, just checking for it. But the 2 extra points they got from this processor just because of, oh yeah, we'll be fine. No one ever does processor. The 2 extra points in terms of value compared to putting in the barge swings them up by 1 point. And we see that 324 falls here. A bread doesn't end up touching the ground as well. So there are 2 missed climbs as well in this match. But because of those 2 missed climbs, Alliance 2 ends up taking it by a single point. 26 points in barge, 26 points. A ridiculously close match. And even though Alliance 1 has so many things that end up going for them, like in terms of how game pieces ended up working out, you had, they did a processor score, so if you score it in the barge from the human player, then it's worth less. They only get 2 point swing instead of 4, which you normally would have. There's an algae that falls all the way over here. They end up making back all of the coral gap. We saw that it was like a 9 coral gap at one point. It's only 2 at the end here. They're up an algae in the barge, and yet because of the fact that there is no processor score, there's a misclimb, Alliance 1 ends up losing this match. And one of the biggest takeaways for Alliance 1 here is the fact that they lost playing triple offense, right? If we look at the score that ends up happening at the end here, both alliances played triple offense, both alliances did really well, but they were just outscored in Coral. The reason that Bread missed a bunch of scores on this L3 earlier is because of the fact that they saw the score and they were like, oh shoot, we have to make this back. We have to speed up our cycles to try to get this. And so because of that, Alliance 1 realizes, oh, okay, we cannot just play triple offense and get away with it against this Alliance 2. We have to do something different, because otherwise, even with some fortunate things happening for us, we might end up losing the next match. And so going into Finals 3, Alliance 1 ends up doing the exact same thing Alliance 2 did at the start, right? We had a match of Alliance 2 thinks that they might lose, so we send a defense robot over. We had a match of both alliances think they're just better than the other alliance at scoring, so we're just going to score triple offense. And Alliance 1 here is for the third match is going to realize, okay, if we're down in Telly at like the middle of the match, we need 1477 to go lock down Petty on defense because they are a funnel robot and they are defendable. And let's see exactly what happens in the next match, Finals Match 3. Alright, so Finals 3, starting off, you have the same autos that these alliances have been running all day, and, you know, they work relatively well. A little bit of funky coral getting scored over here by Petty, but other than that, most of the things go well, except for the fact that Bread ends up missing a lot of their pieces, unluckily. So it is a relatively close score at the end of auto. Alliance 2 ends up going up by a little bit, but in terms of auto, it's like dead even. So starting into Telly, we see same strategy, right? We are doing algae. We have to get rid of the algae first. Make sure you deny it from the other alliance, and then as soon as you're done with the algae, what are we doing? We're just going as fast as we can. And so one of the weird things here from 1477 is that they end up going for funnel here. So it looks like they've switched their strategy for 1477, saying, okay, we don't really need the L1s from you right now because, you know, we weren't able to finish the reef in the past two matches because we've been focusing on L1s too much, right? In the first match, we had a missing L4 over here. In the second match, we had a missing L3 over here. Both of those could have won them matches, right? Because instead of doing an L1, you did an L3, you get extra point value. You could have won the match of that. So either that or the fact that 1477's L1 arm is broken makes Alliance 1 choose to put 1477 on a, like, do a pick up off the funnel and just score as much as we can in terms of third robot. And then once 254 is done with their algae, or mostly done with their algae, just go to the other side and play defense, try to slow down this alliance. And so that's what we'll see exactly, right? On the other side, you have just the same strategy of score as much as you can, right? Get rid of the algae, make sure they don't get denied. Have 1477 do a bunch of L3s while 254 does the algae. And then as soon as 254 is basically done with the algae, you think they're done? Alright, hop over to the other side. 1477, I would like to congratulate the driver. Thank you very much for not driving into the red cages. That would have sent me off a wall. You cannot drive through the other opponent's cages. That is a 6-point foul. So good awareness by them to not just rip over and choose a safe path. And immediately they get over there, they smack 118 real hard. And so their strategy here is going to be, we don't think that ground intake is that defendable, right? Contrary to what Alliance 2 thought they could do against ground intake, because they were having 324 try to defend ground intake over here. 1477 is just going to be like, we are just stopping the funnel robot. That is our entire job. We're going to try our hardest to just slow down the funnel robot and try to hit any coral that 118 or 324 want to pick up just out of the way. And they do a pretty decent job, right? I would like to point out that this is likely one of the first times that 1477 is driving defense in their season. So, considering it's their first time driving defense, they do a pretty good job. Because they're such a good team in Texas, so I would doubt that they would ever be driving defense as like a second pick, unless they're like majorly broken. So just looking at the defense, one of the biggest things that they weren't doing was getting in front of a robot, right? I mean, we talked about it before in like all the defense matches that we saw earlier. One of the best things to do against funnel robots is to do not push them to the side. They have a funnel. They will get the coral no matter what. If you let them into this position, just back up and just try to stop them from getting out. And I think one of the reasons why they get scared of, maybe they choose not to do this on purpose, is just because of the fact that it's so risky with 324 being on the front side so much, because of the fact that they're able to score these pyramid stacks, right? They don't have to move to the backside ever, and 118 is just doing whatever is given to them. They're going to end up doing a bunch of these L2s as well here. So you have three robots that can very easily punish you for playing defense if you go over here by just sticking their bumper out a little bit. So I think it's a pretty decent choice by 1477 if they just don't want to lose the match, saying, okay, we're not going to lose the match. We are just going to stay on our lane. We're just going to try to slow down Petty as much as possible without getting any foul points. So instead of playing open field defense, we're just going to play as safe as possible. And so at this point, we see that Alliance 1 is down by a total of 8 coral. They got an algae stolen from them as well. So it's like they get the +4. You have the -4 for your potential total. You also are down 8 coral. it's really just a dire situation at this point, and it's really just what Alliance 1 expected would happen going into this, right? They thought that they would get outscored in terms of the teleop by Alliance 2 again, and so they said, okay, send 1477 over as a gambit. Maybe we can pull out a win if they play really incredible defense. And sadly, they just weren't able to put up enough of a lockdown on Petty to completely deny this Alliance from scoring as much as they would have liked to. But at this point, something I would like to point out is the fact that the score is like, what? This is like a 30-ish point gap, about 27, sure. But I would have loved to see 1477 go for a climb defend. Because as we saw before, 324 dropped to the ground last match. They dropped to the ground the first match. They clearly have an unreliable climb. Petty loves to go a lot earlier at 19, 20 seconds. I would have loved to see 1477 say, okay, we're going to risk our climb not hitting, and we're just going to play defense as a last resort because we're so far behind in terms of points. But instead, 1477 just decides to hit 324 a bit before this, and then just go hit a climb. And at this point, the moment that one of these robots hits a climb on the Red Alliance, the match is essentially done, right? Bread goes up, and at this point, because of the fact that both these red robots are going up, and you have such a large gap, even if all three of them missed and you three hit, I think Alliance 2 still wins this. So, just a very tragic end for this obviously very high potential alliance. But well played by Alliance 2 to just completely understand exactly what was happening in their matches, diagnose why they lost match 1, and come up with strategies to just completely outsmart the other. If I had to take one thing away from these sets of matches, it is how flexible both of these alliances were in terms of their strategies, right? Alliance 1 comes in thinking, we're going to easily sweep you guys with triple offense. Alliance 2 comes in thinking, okay, we have to slow these guys down. We think that they'll beat us in terms of telly because we don't have 2 ground TT robots, we only have 1. And then Alliance 2 has the recognition, okay, we can very much win this if we play triple offense, and they switch up the strategy. And then Alliance 1, to their credit, has a great recognition of the situation as well. Also could be due to the fact that 1477 wasn't really ground taking, could be an issue with their mechanism, I'm not sure. But they switch that up, go into Finals 3 saying, okay, we have to figure out how to stop this Alliance 2 triple offense, throw defense at it, say, it's the last match, what are we going to do? Just throw something at them, because we're just going to get outscored if we don't. And, solid strategy doesn't end up working out. Something I would have loved to see in this game specifically for Worlds is not a double Elan's bracket, just because of the fact that I loved how these best of threes played out. Right, you see all the growth in strategy from these alliances clashing against each other, just people one-upping themselves, trying to figure out what's the next step up, and you don't really get that with the double Elan's bracket. And so, I think most kids at this point wouldn't have been around in 2022 who were on a team. But if you remember 2022, the way that the Elan's bracket worked was that you have 1 played 8, 2 played, or 1 played 8, and then 4 played 5, and then 2 played 7, and then 3 played 6. And this was a single Elam tournament. And all of these matches were all best of threes, and they all then played each other in best of threes. And then, it's every single one of these is a best of 3. At the end, there's a best of 3. And with the double Elam bracket, of course, you get Alliance 8s, Alliance 7s being able to prove that they're better than the 5, 6, 7 and get district points and prove that they're better alliances. But what you lose with a loss of BO3s is this type of strategy growth in terms of trying to one-up other alliances, seeing how can you get the edge over another alliance, and just head-to-head clashes between these awesome strategy teams. So, one thing to take away from this match, if you had one thing to take away, it is the incredible scouting that I'm sure happened for these alliances to even come up with these strategies and assess the situations and be like, okay, we can win this in this way, or we have to do this to try to win. And then also just incredible scoring all around. A great job by all of these alliances. Congrats to Alliance 2 for pulling out what I think going into the Milstein playoffs, no one really expected anyone to contest Bread in 254. Congrats to Alliance 2 for being able to do that. And, they did a great job on Einstein's as well. That was everything for this episode of RoboReplay. I do plan on doing some more Worlds breakdowns, and I would love to look at IRI as well when that comes around. There's going to be a bunch of really, really competitive off seasons that I'll be checking out as well. But for now, I will be checking out more of Worlds. There's a Curie match that I really want to break down in terms of strategy. I thought it was very, very cool to watch, as well as whatever the heck happened on Dolly and how Citrus's, like, I don't even know how many years World streak or Einstein streak, how it got broken and what happened to cause that, as well as in the future looking at what 6RP could mean for first, because if they stick with this system, what could it entail for rankings in general? As we saw, rankings were a little bit wonky in Worlds. All right, that's everything. Thank you for watching, and have a lovely day.